Well, good morning, everybody. Uh, I'll tell you, the fact is, looking at the news today, I am really overwhelmed. I don't, I almost don't know where to begin. And so I'm going to handle this a little differently today. Rather than do detail oriented, tactical moves on the ground, let's step back and talk strategy at the high level, the kind of 30,000 view foot, uh, the 30,000 foot view rather, of where we are right now. Sir General Richard Sharif, who followers of this channel hear me quote all the time, because he's one of the people who understands what's really going on here. And everything he says puts him on the right side of history, in my opinion. And I was listening to him the other day, and he said the words, "We are at the most dangerous time right now." And I believe him. And there is really only one reason for that. It's because the US federal system has been subverted by malign foreign powers, and we have to stop acting like that's not what happened. We have to come to terms with the fact that Tulsi Gabbard is either a useful idiot or a Russian asset. We have to come to terms with Donald Trump is either a useful idiot or a Russian asset who is actively demolishing the US federal government from within the White House on the orders of the Kremlin. It certainly looks that way. The things he said this weekend about how he's having an easier time dealing with Vladimir Putin than he is with Volodymyr Zelensky were such an obscene offense to all reason that one cannot even begin to start. Well, yeah, it's funny how you get along with people who you just hand somebody else to on a silver fucking platter. Are you kidding me? Of course you get along better with him. While forgetting about anything that looks like justice, while taking advantage of the Ukrainian weakness at this time to try to extort from them the valuable natural resources that they have that could be used to rebuild this nation following the aggression of Russia. I cannot understate for everybody the dismay, the anguish, the I don't want to say despair, but for some folks are despairing. But most folks are determined in the face of this extraordinary betrayal by the United States. And you and I both know that Trump is not just betraying the Ukrainians in favor of Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. He's betraying everything that America is supposed to be. USAID funding is cutting 83% of their projects. USAID is our soft power in the world. It's how we win hearts, influence generations by providing clean drinking water, enough food, cultural exchanges. The goal of Donald Trump is to destroy American influence in the world. And this is the Russian playbook writ large. Donald Trump is their greatest success. When we think about how the Russians operate, how they have always operated, they sow division and dissension among their enemies. Now, because that's good for them. So a Europe and US divided is the best thing for Russia. But what Russia didn't count on is that the Europeans, when faced with this threat, appear to be coming together in new and brilliant ways that nobody would have thought possible 10 years ago. But that's all brand new. And it's all in the embryonic stages. We don't know whether or not the Europeans will find the political will to do what is necessary to replace the United States. We've seen tremendous strides in this direction. Do not get me wrong. The Norwegians, for example, a much smaller GDP than the US, have increased their spending in Ukraine for this year to $8 billion, nearly doubling it. And if I'm not mistaken, it was Sweden, but I apologize, I'd have to look this up. But if I'm not mistaken, it was one of the Nordic countries. The people crowdfunded something like, I want to say it was over 10 million US dollars. Just crowdfunded like $10 million for a bunch of armored vehicles. These kinds of grassroots movements among the people who are most local to Russia should tell you who the enemy is and what we ought to be afraid of. And, I'll tell you, this whole conflict, I never once thought it could go nuclear. But now that we have a madman in the White House and Europe is no longer under the protection of the US nuclear umbrella, I don't know that maybe Putin wouldn't make a little demonstration. And then I don't know what would happen. And it is so disheartening to see Lindsey Graham, well, I mean, you can't expect much from Lindsey Graham, but still, to lick Trump's boots the way he has over Ukraine, after all of his talk of solidarity with Ukraine, of fighting for democracy and freedom in the world, to just bend over and take it from Donald from behind. And the silence from the Republicans on this is deafening. So, as Sir General Richard Sharif said, we are at the most dangerous time. The Kursk incursion appears to be over. Now, I don't know that to be true, but the Russians brought in 150 Koksan self-propelled artillery from the North Koreans and 1,500 artillerymen to operate them. And they reactivated those 8,000 troops, North Korean troops that are still in Kursk. And they have made a bold, aggressive attack that has essentially cut the Ukrainian supply lines. And as I understand it, Syrskyi has now ordered withdrawal from Kursk. Now, that may not be all of Kursk. There's still some of Kursk that's attached to Ukraine that may be defensible. But the main body of the Kursk incursion appears just about over, March 10th, 2025. August 6th was when it started, right? So September, October, November, December, January, February, March, 7 months. Because now, of course, the Russians are going to be screaming about this tremendous win, right? Tremendous win. Let's take a look at that tremendous win, shall we? For 7 months, the Ukrainians went to bed, woke up in control of Russian soil. It's astonishing. For 7 months. And what did it take Russia to get them out of there? Well, we know they moved at least 78,000 Russian troops into Kursk over the last 7 months. We know that they brought in at least 13,500 North Koreans on top of that. So they pinned down or ground up 100,000 men for 7 months, all the while attriting the front line in Ukraine. Not only was it a stupendous PR win for the Ukrainians, it served the purpose it was meant to make Putin look bad and weak, which he is, to pin Russian troops in along a new battle line, which it did, to replenish the coffers for prisoner exchange, which, with close to 2,000 Russians captured in the Kursk incursion, it certainly did that. And then, of course, the big thing was to draw reserves from the front line in Ukraine, which it did that. So as far as I can see, the Kursk incursion accomplished all of the goals that Ukraine could possibly have wanted it to accomplish. And now, smartly, it is time to leave. That's what you do. You get the fuck out. When it's the men or the land, you choose the men. And that's the failure of Vladimir Putin. That's what's going to cost him this war. When it's the land or the men, you choose the men. That is the fundamental distinction between the way that we operate in the West and the way that the Russians operate. Just look at Russian society and economics. 140 million people in the country, half the size of the United States. Huge extraction economy that makes billions. Standard of living less than Mexico. All of those billions that it makes account for only a $2 trillion economy. Now get this, just think about this for a second. In 5 years ago, so 2019, the U.S. economy was about $19 trillion. 2024, it was about $24 trillion, 24 trillion GDP. That's a $5 trillion increase during the Biden administration, I would point out. And Trump has already eliminated 3.9 trillion in value in the stock market in fucking 46 days. So anyway, the U.S. economy grew $5 trillion from 2019 to 2024, right? That's 2.5 Russian economies in a country that's only twice the population. Why? Why are the differences so fucking huge? Compound interest. The Russians don't understand compound interest. They don't understand debt instruments. And more importantly, just aside from basic economic failures, more importantly, they steal everything at the top. 400 people, literally 400 people in Russia own 99.98% of all of Russia's wealth. You think we have wealth inequality in the United States. Trump and his cronies want to make it that kind of ratio. They want to burn it all down, and from the ashes, they will hoard the embers. And the rest of us will be left as a permanent underclass just like the Russians. This is where we're at. If Vladimir Putin is not stopped, they're going to do to the United States what the czars and the Politburo and the God Emperor King Putin, the czar of the ashes, has done to Russia. This is clearly what's going on, because nothing Trump says makes sense unless what I've just said is true. If what I've just said is true, then it all makes sense, doesn't it? So there are rumors here that the Ukrainians are really short on men at the front, that everybody's worried about it. And yet, we see the Russian advances in Ukraine slowed to a halt, while we see the Ukrainians consistently now retaking Russian positions. Zaporizhia, Pokrovsk, Toretsk, more and more in Toretsk, Chasiv Yar now. They're apparently hammering the Russians in Chasiv Yar, who until just last week were still advancing. Vovchansk, and along the Kreminna-Svetova line. Could it be that neither army has enough men that if they made a breakthrough of the line, they could exploit it? It might be. And if that's the case, then that means that the whole front line is going to have to move at a grinding attritional pace forward. That's the fight that the Ukrainians are in. The good news is that for the last several months, the Russians have not been able to replace their losses. So they're recruiting about 28,000 men a month, but they've been losing about 46,000. I haven't seen the numbers for February, though. They're lower for February, not just because it's a shorter month, but because the level of offensive attacks has slowed. And for their part, the Russians are just pouring everything on. You know, we have drone attacks almost every night. I thought they were lessening, but boy, they picked right back up again. Over 150. And some missile attacks. We just got the first video footage of a Mirage shooting down a Russian cruise missile. So the Mirages are patrolling the skies and performing anti-aircraft maneuvers against incoming Russian missiles. We are at the most dangerous time. It is just that simple. And so it is more important than ever that everybody tries to do whatever they can. And I would point out Blue Star in Ohio. She paints rocks yellow and blue and hides them around town. And people find them, right? Some people probably throw them in the creek. Some people, though, take them home, put them on the windowsill, maybe put them in the rock garden out front. And every time they see it, they are reminded that there is a war here and that America just switched sides. And they ought to be asking themselves, why did that happen? Why are we suddenly friends with our enemies and enemies with our friends? How can this be? What world are we living in? And those little rocks become ripples of hope in the world. So it doesn't matter what you do. Like Zelensky says, in a big war, there are no small actions. And whatever action you can take, please, now is the time to take it. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you on tonight's live.